After the extreme cold arrived, the entire city searched for heat. Some people crowded into shopping malls, some hid in underground parking garages, others sealed every window in their homes. But the place where I ultimately survived was a cold storage warehouse, one kept at -18 degrees Celsius. My name is Tianbula. My friends call me Tiantian. It began 7 days before the true deep freeze. It was late September. I had been assigned 3 consecutive night shifts. That night was the first. I worked at the old North Suburbs cold chain transfer depot. It wasn't an ordinary warehouse. It supplied frozen goods to supermarkets, restaurants, and neighborhood buying groups. It was an aging cold storage distribution center. The depot was divided into 6 zones, A through F. Zones A and C were the busiest. Trucks were often loaded there at night. Zone B was the oldest, especially storage room 3. Its equipment was old and frequently repaired. It had been partly decommissioned for years. Apart from the maintenance crew, almost no one ever went to the very back. That evening, I was checking orders in the duty office. A newly delivered maintenance form lay on the desk. It read, Zone B Equipment Maintenance. Location, Storage Room 3. Backup power supply. Diesel barrels and insulation. Sealant and medical kits. Received by Zhou Jiangwo. Zhou Jianggo was old Joe, head of maintenance. He had worked at the depot for over 20 years. Whenever anything broke, they called him. But the items on that maintenance form didn't look like ordinary repair supplies. Backup power and sealant made sense. But diesel barrels, insulation, and medical kits delivered together to a half-closed storeroom felt suspicious. As the first studied the form, Mao Bufan spoke from the doorway. A half-decommissioned storeroom. Needs medical kits and diesel barrels for maintenance? Mao Bufan was a temporary dispatcher. He handled nighttime loading and order checks. His favorite pastime was gossiping behind people's backs and prying into their business. I put away the maintenance form and ignored him, because I also sensed something was wrong. Mao Bufan smiled. Tiantian, don't you think there's something strange about that form? I looked at him. You're a dispatcher, not maintenance. Stop prying. He claimed he was only asking, but his eyes remained fixed on the form. I ignored him, though my unease continued to grow. According to shift regulations, whenever a maintenance request arrived at night, the clerk had to verify the location in person. So I took my clipboard and headed to Zone B. The corridor lights were on. Old storeroom doors and decommissioned equipment lined both sides. I had walked this corridor many times, but rarely went to the back of storage room 3. Tonight was different. The maintenance form clearly specified storage room 3 in Zone B. I walked all the way to the deepest section and finally found a grey-white door. 6 words were printed on it. Equipment area. Authorized personnel only. I paused before it for several seconds. The door was spotless, unlike the other old doors in the warehouse, but I was certain it hadn't been there before. I stepped inside. There wasn't an equipment room behind it, but a corridor leading even deeper underground. Another metal door stood at the far end. A sign beside it read, 7th Sector. I stood in the doorway, completely stunned. The North Suburbs depot had only 6 zones, A through F. I had never heard of a 7th sector. I passed through the metal door. Beyond it wasn't a normal warehouse, but a neatly organized area of numbered storage bays. Rows of bays lined both sides. Each displayed a number. 301, 402, 601. Every bay contained water, rice, medical kits, thermal blankets, and backup power supplies. None of those items appeared on any inventory list I had seen. The farther I walked, the heavier my heart became, until I saw a label attached to Bay 601. 601 Tianbula. I stood frozen for a long time. 601 was my apartment number. Tianbula was my name. Bay 601 contained water, rice, medical kits, thermal blankets, and a small backup generator. Every item bore the same name. Tianbula. My thoughts were in chaos. Who had put these supplies here? Why was my name written on them? Why did the number match my apartment? I couldn't understand it. I knew only one thing. Hidden inside the depot where I'd worked nights for 2 years was a secret I had never known. I kept walking deeper inside. There was one final storage bay, numbered 612. Every other bay held supplies. Only 612 was empty. There was no water, no rice, and no medical kit. It contained only a black metal box. A sheet of paper lay beside it. Just as I stepped closer, old Joe's voice sounded behind me. "Don't touch it yet." I turned around. Old Joe stood at the entrance to the 7th sector, his face grim. I asked him what this place was. Old Joe didn't answer. He only asked, "How did you find this place?" The maintenance form said storage room 3 in Zone B. Old Joe's expression changed immediately. I left that form in the duty office. I nodded. Old Joe muttered, "This is bad." I stared at him. "What's bad?" Old Joe didn't answer. I pointed at Bay 601 and asked, "Why is my name here?" Old Joe studied the label. After a long pause, he said, "This bay wasn't originally yours. It belonged to your father." My heart tightened. I was about to ask about my father when I noticed a sheet of paper on the shelf in Bay 612. It had no date and no signature, only a single sentence. "When the temperature falls below -56 degrees, open the 3rd door." I looked at old Joe. "What is the 3rd door?" He didn't answer immediately. He stared at the paper, his face even grimmer than before. "Have you seen this paper before?" I asked. Old Joe nodded once. "It's been in Bay 612 for many years." I pressed him. "Do you know what that sentence means?" Old Joe shook his head. I stared at the words on the paper, my heart sinking. -56 degrees, the 3rd door. I didn't understand either phrase. But old Joe's reaction told me that this paper was important. Just then, my phone vibrated. It was a message from Mao Bufun. "Joe Jiangwo signed so many supplies into Zone B. Now you've gone in there too." "Tiantian, what exactly are you hiding inside?" When old Joe saw the message, his expression changed instantly. He explained neither the 7th sector nor my father. He merely said quietly, "We need to leave first." When we exited the 7th sector, the corridor in Zone B was silent. But as I reached the equipment area door, my phone vibrated again. It was still Mao Bufun. This time, there was only one sentence. "Tiantian, what exactly are you hiding in there?" Mao Bufun had originally assumed that storage room 3 merely concealed some supplies. But that night, he heard another name. The 3rd door. From that moment on, the equipment area was no longer his only target. On my phone, Mao Bufun's message still remained. "Tiantian, what exactly are you hiding in there?" I didn't reply. Old Joe didn't want me to either. He glanced at the message, then lowered his voice. He saw the maintenance form. I asked, "What do we do now?" Old Joe looked toward the area outside. "Don't return to the duty office yet." I asked why. "Mao Bufun has already seen the maintenance form. If you go back now, he'll interrogate you. The more questions he asks, the harder it will be to hide the 7th sector." I understood. Mao Bufun wasn't merely asking a casual question. He had connected the maintenance form, storage room 3 in Zone B, old Joe, and me, into a single theory. Old Joe led me back into the equipment area. When the side door closed, the corridor outside fell silent. I finally asked, "What exactly is the 7th sector?" Old Joe was silent for several seconds. 20 years ago, when they expanded Zone B, someone established an emergency reserve project for extreme low temperatures. Publicly, it was only an equipment area and backup compartment. Internally, it was called the 7th sector. I looked at him. "So these supplies weren't hidden here recently?" Old Joe shook his head. "No, they've always been here. Very few people knew about them." I asked, "Then how did you know?" Old Joe replied, "I don't own this place. I'm only the caretaker who stayed behind. Supplies expire. Equipment needs maintenance. The backup generators, keys, diesel, and medical kits can't simply be abandoned. I suddenly understood. The backup power supplies, diesel barrels, insulation, sealant, and medical kits on the farm weren't for normal repairs. Old Joe was maintaining the 7th sector. And that was exactly why Mal Bufin had become suspicious. I remembered the name on Bay 601 and immediately asked, "Why does 601 have my name on it? Did you put it there?" Old Joe shook his head. "I only handle maintenance. I have no authority to change the bays or their names." I stared at him. "Then why was it changed to Tiambula?" This time, Old Joe answered directly. "Bay 601 originally belonged to your father. Later, he named you as its heir. That's why it now says Tiambula." My heart sank. So, my name hadn't suddenly appeared in the 7th sector. My father had reserved that place for me long ago. I was about to ask another question, but Old Joe spoke first. "I don't know everything about why your father did this, but I know Bay 601 isn't an ordinary storage bay." I looked at him. "What do you mean?" Old Joe didn't answer at once. He led me into the 7th sector again. Rows of grey-white numbered storage bays stood silently beneath the cold lights. 301, 402, 503, 601. When the first passed Bay 601, I couldn't help looking over. The label bearing my name was still there. Old Joe didn't stop. He led me all the way to Bay 612 at the back. There were no supplies inside 612, only the black metal box and that sheet of paper. Old Joe looked at Bay 612 and spoke in a hushed voice. Bay 612 belonged to Shen Xuan. I asked, "Who was Shen Xuan?" "The original director of the 7th sector. The reserve numbers, maintenance rules, and the 3rd door were all left behind by him." I looked at Bay 612. "Where is he now?" Old Joe shook his head. "No one has been able to contact him for years. Bay 612 has remained empty. He left only this metal box. And this paper." I looked again at the sentence. "When the temperature falls below -56 degrees, open the 3rd door. -56 degrees. The number sounded absurd. Yet it reminded me of the recent abnormal cooling. I suddenly felt that the number might not have been written at random. I asked Old Joe, "Is the equipment area door outside the 3rd door?" Old Joe shook his head. "No, the equipment area door is only the 1st. The metal door to the 7th sector is the 2nd. The 3rd door mentioned on the paper is the real door." My heart tightened. "Where is the 3rd door?" Old Joe looked at Bay 601, then at Bay 612. "I don't know. I only know the clue lies within these 2 bays. Bay 612 left behind the paper. Bay 601 left behind you." The word sent a chill down my spine. I asked what lay beyond the door. Old Joe paused. "Shen Xuan said only one thing back then. The 7th sector stores reserves. The 3rd door keeps people alive." I froze. The 7th sector already held water, rice, medical kits, backup generators, and diesel. If those were merely reserves, what could possibly lie beyond the 3rd door? Old Joe offered no further explanation. He turned toward the exit. "We should leave tonight. Mal Bufin has his eyes on Zone B. We can't let him learn anything more." We followed the equipment area corridor outside. Near the outer door, I couldn't resist asking, if the 3rd door truly exists, how do we open it? Old Joe paused. "I don't know. But if Shen Xuan left that sentence, then it isn't an ordinary door." I pressed him. "What does that mean?" Old Joe lowered his voice. "An ordinary door opens once you find it. The 3rd door probably doesn't." I was about to ask more, when Mal Bufin's voice suddenly came from outside. "What 3rd door?" My entire body stiffened. He hadn't left, or at least, he hadn't gone far. Silence lingered outside for several seconds. Then Mal Bufin spoke again. one equipment area door, and you refuse to explain it. Now there's a third door inside too? He laughed. Tiantian, you're hiding even more than I imagined. I said nothing. Old Joe remained silent too. Mao Bufen's voice slowly dropped. Fine. I won't go in tonight, but I'll be back tomorrow night. His footsteps gradually faded. From farther down the corridor, he called back, tomorrow night. I won't be the only one standing outside this door. This time, Old Joe didn't make me stay behind. We shut the equipment area door, crossed the corridor, and entered the 7th sector again. Rows of grey-white numbered storage bays stood silently beneath the cold lights. 301, 402, 503, 601. I approached Bay 601. The label bearing the name Tianbula was still there. Old Joe stood beside me, his voice low. Your father didn't leave you Bay 601, just for these supplies. I didn't reply, because the same thought had occurred to me. If the 7th sector was only a reserve area, then the true clue to the third door probably lay somewhere between Bays 601 and 612. I looked toward Bay 612 at the very back. It remained empty. The paper that read, when the temperature falls below -56 degrees, open the third door, still lay there undisturbed. Old Joe said quietly, the outdoor unit warnings have increased recently. I asked, is the equipment failing? Old Joe sighed. The equipment isn't failing. The temperature outside is dropping too fast. I looked at the paper in Bay 612, and my heart sank. -56 degrees sounded absurd, but the recent cooling had already become abnormal. Just then, footsteps sounded outside the equipment area. There was more than one person. Mao Bufen had arrived. His voice carried through the door. Zhou Jungwo, Tiantian, I know you're in there. Old Joe looked at me. I shook my head. Don't go out yet. Mao Bufen shouted again. Open the door. Old Joe replied through it. Maintenance is underway. Unauthorized personnel are forbidden. Mao Bufen laughed. Still using maintenance as an excuse. Backup power supplies, diesel barrels, medical kits, and insulation all went into Zone B. And you expect me to believe it's just maintenance? Old Joe didn't answer, because explanations were useless now. Mao Bufen wasn't seeking an explanation. He wanted an excuse to open the door. Another man outside muttered, Bufen, why is it so cold tonight? It's only late September, but it feels like winter. Mao Bufen ignored him. He called out more urgently, Tiantian, you went inside last night. You must know what's in there. I walked up behind the equipment area door and spoke. You don't really want to know whether this is maintenance. You don't really want to know whether this is maintenance. You think there's something inside that you can steal. Mao Bufen didn't answer immediately. After several seconds, he sneered. Tiantian, don't make it sound so ugly. Then don't do something so ugly. Mao Bufen's voice turned cold. Fine. The more you protect this door, the more certain I am that I'm in the right place. I looked at Old Joe. He took the bait. Old Joe asked, what do you mean? I explained. He thinks this equipment area door is the key. Let's keep him thinking that. Mao Bufen had focused on the wrong first door. As long as he thought the secret lay in the outer layer, he wouldn't immediately understand. Bay 601. Outside, Mao Bufen finally lost patience. Zhou Jiangwo, this is your final chance. Are you opening the door or not? Old Joe didn't answer. The next second, a heavy thud struck the door. They had begun ramming it. The door was extremely heavy. They couldn't break through quickly, but each impact echoed inside, as if forcing us to retreat. Instead of feeling afraid, I remembered what Old Joe had just said. Bay 601 wasn't an ordinary storage bay. If Bay 612 held only the clue, could the real answer lie in Bay 601? We returned to Bay 601. Just then, the small indicator beside its storage area briefly lit up. It flashed once, then went dark. Old Joe and I both saw it. His expression changed. It has never lit up before. I stared at the indicator, my heart suddenly racing. No door opened. Nothing inside the bay changed. But I knew that bay 601 had begun responding. Old Joe said quietly, "The light means the falling temperature has triggered 601. But the door still hasn't opened. Outside, Mal Bufon kept shouting, "Tiantian, open the door while you still can." I didn't answer. He had no idea that I wasn't the one who should be afraid. Another impact struck the door. The indicator beside bay 601 lit up again. This time, it stayed on. I stared at the glowing white light, and finally became certain. The prediction on the paper in bay 612 was coming true. Yet Mal Bufon still believed he'd found the correct door. Mal Bufon thought breaking through the equipment area door would secure his survival. But he didn't know that bay 612 was the most conspicuous place in the 7th sector, while bay 601 was the one actually responding. And bay 601 bore my name, Tianbula. Another heavy impact struck the equipment area door. Mal Bufon had stopped pretending. The 2 loaders he'd brought were being pushed to ram it harder. One of them muttered, "Bufon, it's too cold outside. Why don't we stop?" Mal Bufon immediately snapped, "We've come this far, and now you want to quit? If there really is something behind that door, don't you want your share?" Hearing that actually calmed me. He hadn't come to investigate. He had come to steal. Old Joe watched the door, his face grim. I whispered, "Let him into the outer section." Old Joe looked at me. "Are you sure?" I nodded. "If he keeps ramming the door, the night crew in Zone A will eventually come over. Then more than these 3 will get inside. Let him see the tools in the outer area first. If he thinks he's found something, he'll continue searching in the wrong place." Old Joe understood my plan. The outer equipment area had already been arranged, with toolboxes, old cables, dismantled ventilation fans, and several empty oil drums. It looked like an ordinary maintenance site. Nothing there was valuable or important. If Mal Bufon saw only those things, he'd assume we were using maintenance to fool him. Then he'd certainly search farther inside. But I didn't want him focused on bay 601. I wanted him to focus on bay 612 because it was empty, because the note was there, and because greedy people are easily deceived by the most conspicuous object. Old Joe approached the door and said through it, "Stop ramming it." The noise outside paused. Mal Bufon sneered, "Finally willing to open it?" Old Joe didn't answer. He opened the equipment area door. Mal Bufon practically shoved his way inside. The 2 loaders followed him. The first things they saw were the toolboxes and old equipment on the floor. Mal Bufon's smile froze. "That's all?" I told him. "You said we were hiding something." Mal Bufon examined the tools, then looked toward the deeper corridor. He wasn't stupid. They wouldn't fool him for long. He stepped forward. Old Joe blocked him. "You aren't authorized to go any farther." Mal Bufon's face darkened. "Backup power, diesel barrels, medical kits, and insulation. Those weren't brought here for a few boxes of junk tools." Then he marched deeper inside. Old Joe tried to stop him, but I held Old Joe back. "Let him look." Old Joe frowned. I watched Mal Bufon's back. He won't stop until he sees something real. Mal Bufon crossed the equipment area corridor and finally saw the 7th sector. Rows of grey-white numbered storage bays stood neatly beneath the cold lights. 301, 402, 503, 601, and bay 612 farther inside. Mal Bufon's expression changed. He saw the water inside the bays, along with rice, medical kits, thermal blankets, and backup power. His eyes immediately lit up. It wasn't surprise. It was greed. He looked at us. I knew it. "You really were hiding supplies." I stared at him coldly. "They aren't yours." Mal Bufon laughed. "At a time like this, why distinguish between yours and mine?" I didn't respond. Just then, my phone vibrated. It was the cold storage duty group. "Abnormal temperature drop tonight. Night shift staff, take safety precautions." One of the loaders Mal Bufon had brought said through chattering teeth. "Bufon, something is seriously wrong outside." My hands are nearly frozen. Mal Bufon ignored him. The colder it became outside, the more desperate he grew. He had seen the supplies in the 7th sector, and had begun to believe that something here could truly keep people alive. Soon, his gaze settled on Bay 612 at the back. Bay 612 was empty. There was no water or rice, and no medical kit. Only the black metal box and the paper remained. Among all the storage bays, it stood out conspicuously. Mal Bufon walked over and read the sentence on the paper. When the temperature falls below -56 degrees, open the third door. His eyes changed. The third door. So it really exists. Where is it? I didn't answer. Mal Bufon continued. This bay is empty, yet this paper was left here. It can't merely be decoration, can it? I looked at him, and suddenly found him ridiculous. As expected, Bay 612 had captured his attention. He believed 612 held the clue to the third door. But at that moment, the small indicator beside Bay 601 suddenly shone even brighter. Everyone saw it. Mal Bufon stopped. He looked toward Bay 601, his gaze shifting to its label. 601. Tianbula. His expression slowly changed. So you're the one who's truly special. I didn't retreat, because I knew he had understood only half the truth. He knew Bay 601 was responding, but not where the actual door was. Bay 601 wasn't a cabinet, it was an open numbered storage bay. Inside were the water and rice my father had left me, medical kits, thermal blankets and backup power. A grey metal panel covered the rear wall of Bay 601. The small indicator beside that panel had lit up. Only then did I understand. The third door had always been hidden behind Bay 601. Mal Bufon stared at it. Tiantian, you can open it, can't you? I looked at him. Aren't you good at investigating? Figure it out yourself. Mal Bufon's face darkened. He started toward Bay 601. Old Joe immediately stepped forward and placed himself between us. The two loaders didn't follow. They had realized that this was far more complicated than Mal Bufon had claimed. The cold outside intensified. Mal Bufon looked from Bay 601 to me. He finally became desperate. Tiantian, what exactly is behind that door? I didn't answer, because I didn't know either. I knew only that my father had left Bay 601 to me, for more than a few cases of water and rice. Just then, the grey metal panel on Bay 601's rear wall made a faint sound. The door hadn't opened. One of its locks had merely released. Everyone fell silent. Then the indicator lit fully. 3 words slowly appeared on the panel. Third door. The door did not open. But everyone in the 7th sector saw it. The real third door wasn't in Bay 612 or at the equipment area entrance. It was built into Bay 601's rear wall. Mal Bufon's expression changed. So did his voice. Tiantian, open that door. Mal Bufon believed that once the third door opened, he could be the first to rush inside. But he'd forgotten that the door was hidden behind Bay 601. And the person standing before Bay 601 was me, Tianbula. Inside the 7th sector, everyone stared at the rear wall of Bay 601. 3 words glowed across the grey metal panel. Third door. Mal Bufon's voice changed. Tiantian, open it. I didn't move, because I still didn't know how the door would open. The indicator beside Bay 601 grew brighter. The 2 loaders were panicking. One whispered, Bufon, we really can't stay here. My hands are frozen. Mal Bufon ignored him. His eyes remained fixed on Bay 601. He had seen the water and rice in the 7th sector, the medical kits and backup power, and now the real third door. He was more desperate than anyone. Just then, my phone vibrated. It was the cold storage duty group. Extreme cold warning upgraded. All staff should shelter nearby. Old Joe read the message. His face darkened. The temperature outside has dropped again. As soon as he finished speaking, a soft click came from Bay 601's rear wall. The grey metal panel opened into a narrow gap. It was barely wide enough for one person to pass sideways. Beyond the door wasn't another cold storage room. Warm light shone from inside. I saw backup generators and sealed supply crates. A temperature display on the wall read 15 degrees Celsius. 15 degrees in a night growing colder by the minute. That number mattered more than anything. Mao Bufan saw it too. His eyes lit up. Move! He lunged toward Bay 601. But he had been standing beside Bay 612, while I had remained in front of Bay 601. I was closest to the narrow opening. Old Joe stepped forward to block him, and said only one word. Go! I didn't hesitate. I didn't look back. The next second, I was through the third door. Old Joe retreated inside directly behind me. I heard a mechanical lock engage behind us. Click. The third door closed. By the time Mao Bufan reached Bay 601, it was too late. He slammed his palm against the door. Tiantian. Open the door. His voice sounded muffled now. He was still outside. I stood inside the climate-controlled zone, my palms covered in sweat. Warm light illuminated water tanks and generators. Unlike the cold white lights in the 7th sector, this place was quiet and stable, like a sealed refuge preserved for 20 years. Old Joe leaned against the wall and caught his breath. Shen Chuan didn't lie. Behind the third door truly is a place where we can survive. I said nothing. Only then did I understand. The supplies in the 7th sector were merely outer reserves. The place that could truly keep people alive during the deep freeze was the climate-controlled zone. Beyond this door, outside, Mao Bufan was still shouting, Tiantian, open the door. It's freezing out here. I stared at the sealed third door and didn't move. Moments ago, he'd brought men to ram the door. Moments ago, he tried to seize the 7th sector's supplies. Now he wanted me to save him. I spoke. Mao Bufan, this is my path to survival. Outside. Silence fell for an instant. Then he shouted, I only want to survive. So do I. After saying those 3 words, I offered no further explanation. The extreme cold had truly arrived. Everyone wanted to live. But I wouldn't surrender the lifeline my father had left me to someone who came here to steal it. I wasn't a saint. And I would never hand the third door to Mao Bufan. Outside, the voices of the 2 loaders came through. Bufan, you lied to us. You said we were only coming to look. You never said we'd steal someone else's shelter. Mao Bufan shouted angrily. Shut up, but his voice no longer sounded as forceful. The 7th sector was only a reserve area. It contained supplies but couldn't withstand the true deep freeze. The air outside grew steadily colder. Mao Bufan's pounding became more frantic. Tiantian, open the door. Let me in. I didn't move. Old Joe looked at me. You did the right thing. If we let someone like him inside, he'll throw us out. I surveyed the climate-controlled zone and all its sealed supplies. These things hadn't been preserved for greedy people to steal. My father had left them to me. Outside, Mao Bufan continued pounding the door. Tiantian, open up. I didn't move. At first, the sounds outside were frantic. Then they became slower and quieter, until finally there was no sound at all. The climate-controlled zone was silent. Warm light illuminated the sealed supplies. On a crate at the very back, I saw an old label, 601. Tianbula. At that moment, I thought of the father who had left me years ago. What he left me wasn't merely rows of water and rice, but the right to survive the extreme cold. And through this deep freeze, I would live well.